What if the AI revolution succeeds at almost everything, but nobody actually manages to win? No single app running your life, no government controlling the stack, no corporate monopoly dictating the rules, just endless, hyper-capable, brutal competition. We introduced June's this year, next year forecast with the analogy of the California gold rush and manifest destiny, the sense that inevitability we would reach AGI, that agentic would take over all commerce, and that was what justified the ridiculous amounts of CapEx we've been seeing. But what if there is no destiny, just an ongoing cycle of incremental improvement and productivity gains amid a healthy competitive landscape? That's the future we're going to explore today in the WPP Media Intelligence podcast. And to help me do that, Sam Weston is back with us. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Kay. Thanks for having me back. It's been a joy.
Good. What have you been up to this week, or what are you looking forward to at the weekend?
I'm taking a long weekend with my family. We're going out to Mount Rushmore to stay at a fancy camping establishment called Under Canvas. So excited about spending 18 hours on the road. But no, very, very much looking forward to some time behind the wheel where I'm not looking at my phone.
My week has also been very rock and mountain focused, maybe.
Really?
My kids has taken up rock climbing, so I got belay certified last night, planning to do...
Belay on, belay off?
Exactly. On
okay,
belay and
right.
belay on, yeah. Can't be listening to a podcast, can't be looking at my phone during any of that. It's kind of a nice break.
Yeah, not with your kid dangling from a rope. I guess that's a good way
Right.
to force attention.
Yes. All right. So this is the fourth in our podcast series. In the closed loop in episode 1, we looked at powerful corporate gatekeepers for AI, that potential future. In the agent commons, we looked at what happened if control sat with individuals and their agents. Week 3, the sovereign stack put governments much deeper into the intelligence layer. But this week is different. What are we calling it, Sam?
We're calling this one the long middle, which I think sounds kind of boring at first, but I'm going to try to make the case that it's just as interesting as the others. In this future, models continue to get more and more capable, just like in our other futures. Agents become normal, broadly adopted. AI transforms how companies operate, but it's a future kind of defined by what doesn't happen, which is nobody really succeeds in turning all of the intelligence that we have available into a single, coherent, all-powerful institutional system. Platforms stay powerful, but they still face meaningful competition. Agents become useful, but people still make a lot of important decisions. Governments regulate and intervene, but they don't cross over into constructing, their own sovereign architectures. And open systems still diffuse capability, but without tipping into users having total control. Yeah.
All right. So if we think about our two axes we've been talking about, right, we have more consolidated versus more distributed control of the AI and the intelligence layer, and then we have more commercial versus more civic and governmental control.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this one sit in our 2x2 matrix here?
This one is commercially driven, so just like the closed loop, but also much more plural. Intelligence still comes from companies, not from governments or user-owned infrastructure, but coordination doesn't consolidate into a few enormous end-to-end ecosystems. You've still got labs, you've still got open models, platforms, agents, retailers, publishers, just like today, all sorts of intermediaries coexisting. But it's different from the agent commons, which is where individuals control the relationship. Power remains distributed because the market remains contested. Consumers still depend heavily on commercial providers, but they depend on multiple instead of just one.
I mean, it sounds an awful lot like today, so it's going to be interesting to try and paint a picture of what that 2035 future looks like. I mean, much the same. AI is everywhere. There's more maybe conversational search, more use of some of these new tech surfaces that we've been talking about, autonomous vehicles, glasses, wearables, and voice-based assistant tech. They probably have some household purchasing delegated, but not all of it, importantly. And agents doing much more routine administration, but lots of the behavior that we would recognize today still happening much as it has done with visiting at stores and watching sports and relying on word of mouth recommendations. If we look at in the forecast, even our most aggressive channel growth, which is generative search hitting $100 billion by 2030, it still assumes that it's scaling through existing search and incumbent infrastructure, albeit with multiple competitive companies. There's not a single new universal interface. There's not a single winner of this channel or any other channel. So fast capability growth, slow institutional consolidation, that's kind of the long, middle, and one advertising stat.
Right. Perhaps we should have called it the long now.
Yeah, fair enough.
It sounds like a lot. It sounds a lot like today, maybe even just more complexity, but we get better at managing it. You have an AI system at work that you use. You've got another one at home. You've got a specialist for your health. Maybe you use brand AI for brands you like to interact with. Those systems are even more capable than today's, but you're still making your own decisions when it comes to some of the bigger ones, I think.
So we've asked in the other episodes what has to happen to get to those futures. This one feels like the inverse, where we're talking about what are the big thresholds that never get crossed, what doesn't happen, right? We wrote about in the June forecast, this was actually our most likely future. Basically, neither model or platform owners or technology hardware owners are fully commoditized. Neither are they able to completely dictate terms to the other side. We live in this world of messiness and competition where we don't get a clear answer.
Right. And I think that's probably due to a lot of friction in the system. So agents might get extremely useful, but there's still a meaning difference for people between asking AI for advice and outsourcing every decision to agents to make for you. You might still also have government, probably will still have government working to ensure that no one can put enough pieces together to become all powerful. People can still move between providers, but moving is costly or inconvenient enough that you never get mass adoption of agent commons. Governments are still clearly involved and maybe increasingly involved, but there's no convergence around a single national approach or sovereign stacks between countries. And maybe this is even a future where we learn something along the way about AI economics and how people want to incorporate agents into their lives, their jobs, our economy. Just because AI can conceivably do everything doesn't mean that it's economically rational to use it for everything.
I do think in that, water flowing downhill, though, where it's made easy and people can default to something like that, they probably will do, especially if there's not a direct economic cost to them.
Yep. Yes.
If it's being subsidized and they have to watch some good advertising, then maybe that's still worthwhile. I do think you're right on the potential for government regulation to be one of the main contributors to this future, as we've seen them lean in more recently to certainly some things like AI safety, but also if we think about the last iteration of internet companies and formats with social and taking more of a look at Section 230 or requirements for those companies, it feels like there's a bit of an awakening. Things like requiring Apple. Just in the last week, the German courts required Apple to redo their app tracking transparency notifications, basically, to make sure that Apple asking for its own permissions looks a bit more like when Apple asks for other companies to have for permissions. So it feels like that's on track at this stage to be one of the determining factors there.
I think for sure the AI policy industrial complex is upon us.
Yeah. So presumably none of these actors that exist today, want this, or maybe they do, but presumably they want to win the race, right? So where does that leave us?
Right. Yeah, the long middle is it's a future defined by continuing intense competition, which will be incredibly interesting for those of us who like to watch and analyze competition in our industry. Everyone's still trying to win. Platforms want to take over the world, capture as much market share as they can. Governments want as much control as they can get over critical dependencies. Regulators don't want any one company to win, and consumers want to be able to switch without having to do everything by themselves. So you just get this constantly contested equilibrium, which is like we have today.
Yeah, I think things tend to go in cycles. So this makes sense to me that we have a continuing sort of equilibrium, but with cycles underneath that happening, right? We've always had in advertising these kinds of cycles of centralized versus decentralized computing, for instance, from mainframes to laptops, back to cloud, then to edge. Concentration followed by fragmentation of TV and media owners in general. While Google and Meta have remained at the top of the advertising leaderboard for the last decade, there actually has been significant amount of churn and change underneath them, with 6 of the top 10 now China-based ad sellers. So there is that opportunity for change, and we've seen it, and I think we would expect that to continue. The other thing with AI is that it brings, I think, significant opportunities for new businesses, and we've talked about this before, either as new entertainment formats or communication channels, intermediaries, or specialization, right? So
Right.
you mentioned
you're
this,
not
right?
going to go out of business.
No, but you mentioned like a health AI in particular. I think that idea of specialization and the opportunity there is particularly interesting. So just as we've had pharma specialist agencies, whether that was independent or inside holding companies, maybe the AI enables specialization at a greater scale and better economic terms than what was previously possible. And that makes it more attractive than the generalist model for some. And so, again, that expands competition rather than consolidating it. All right. Well, we talked last week about some of the risks of increased AI capability. Is the safety question here another thing tied to or alongside government regulation that makes this more likely?
Maybe, I don't know if you've seen, but there's been a significant development this week with OpenAI announcing. OpenAI announced it's pausing some of its frontier training and recursive AI development to focus on security and safeguards, which sounds like a good idea. So maybe we get a situation where there's collective agreement across multiple labs to slow down advances until some of these big questions about safety or even the potential impact on employment or social issues at large get addressed and resolved, or at least thought through. There's an assumption in AI circles or AI conversations that once you achieve AGI or super intelligence, you with this runaway AI capability, all the friction in the system just vanishes, or maybe it's actually the opposite. The more advanced these systems become, the more friction we encounter, the more counter reaction we get from society and government and institutions. And that doesn't mean that a long middle future is guaranteed. It could be that the additional cost of safely training and developing models gives the platforms that can afford those costs more advantages, and we get to a closed loop lock-in. Or alternatively, maybe governments just don't like the level of risk that they're seeing and get way more involved, and we end up with the sovereign stack.
Yeah, I love that the model left notes for its like future iterations of how to break out, basically, was the one of the main concerns. Which is like the older sibling telling the younger sibling, like leaving a note telling the younger sibling how to turn off the speed governor in the car when they take it out in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah.
We basically have teenager
Yeah.
AIs. There is another aspect here. It's not really the place to discuss it, but there are still some who think that no matter how recursive or how much reinforcement learning, the type of model we have now isn't the type that's going to bring about AGI.
Right.
So
The world model theories.
Yeah, there's another version of this which says we get to the long middle because not only are the labs we have today competing with themselves, but then there are, people producing this other type of model that add competition and that, creates additional back and forth.
Right. Yeah, or we hit a wall magically, a wall appears and everything slows down. We'll see.
Is that a wall that Tesla cameras can't see and then they drive straight into it?
No comment.
That's
the most attention to the economics around it for the work that you're continually doing. Do you think that a long middle future means that the current trends in AI investment have imploded somewhere along the way?
I think anyone who knows the answer to this question would be a very rich person, so I'm not going to pretend.
I'll take my answer off the air.
This is not investment advice. I don't know that it requires a crash, right? Like if the financing system collapses and capability progress stops, we hit that wall again. I think that's probably even a different future that we haven't discussed.
Right.
I do think the long middle probably means capital becomes more discriminating somewhere along the line. I think that's already happening to some extent today, and that's healthy, right? You have shorts, you have people that are raising questions about the amount of debt financing and all of those things. There is a very strong assumption that more compute, all the capability that we're creating right now, the infrastructure, the intelligence, will ultimately create enormous value. And there's a version of this where advertisers hugely benefit from that, right? Infrastructure investors overspend or spend the right amount. We inherit better tools at a discount, just like fiber after the .com bust. But again, if it really collapses and has larger order effects across equities and consumer 401ks more broadly, then I think we lose some of the resilience that's been in the economy, especially from more affluent consumers who have been sort of the engine of especially US retail sales, but in other markets as well. And then there are the things that don't even necessarily have to do directly with the CapEx investment per se, the sort of knock-on impacts of that. There was a great article in Bloomberg this week about private equity investments in software companies that have been happening over the last 10 years, the use of private credit, exposure of insurance companies and pensions to those risks if AI substantially disrupts recurring software revenues, which is still a part of this future, right? We're still saying it's broadly capable across a number of different things. So there are, I guess it's to say there are absolutely risks that people should be aware of that happen to varying degrees in this future. I'm not sure any of them require an absolute crash.
Right. Okay. All right. So we get to this future that's essentially an AI enhanced version of today. What do you think is actually getting delegated to AI and agents in this world? What are you delegating?
As much as possible. Way too much on my plate. There's probably a useful distinction that we can make between purchases that are problems to solve. Those often look like replenishment, subscriptions, household type things, versus purchases where the act of choosing, the act of shopping is part of the value. So this will make complete sense to listeners, right? Things like fashion, maybe food if you're a gourmand, entertainment, anything luxury, gifts. Maybe people still want advice there, but they're not handing over the full purchase of it. They're happy to do utilities, administrative tasks, happy to hand off those things. The distinction becomes whether choosing itself is meaningful. I think Amazon is a company that understands this, right? Just to pick an example, right? Because they're building out both Alexa Plus sort of agentic pieces for things that they know consumers buy on a regular basis, but then also building a catalog of sports and streaming content, which is an environment for identity forming consumers discovering new products, right? So they're going to be both of these everywhere.
Right. And behavior is a bit of a journey too. People might experiment with things and learn they like them and want to keep doing that, or maybe they get bored of it and it's not monolithic and it can change.
100%. All of those are going to require creative execution in some element, right? At least especially the ones that are meant for human eyeballs, maybe less so the sort of API-based messages. But that feels like something that still changes significantly in the long middle future.
I think by 2035, we probably have whatever the creative singularity looks like. The way that we're already using AI to speed up and improve creative production is incredibly advanced. I mean, what I see at work is it's exciting, and you have to imagine that by the time we get to 2035, all of that is somehow even cheaper and faster than it is today. That probably means that we live in a world of extraordinary content abundance and personalization, and anybody can make whatever they want. And it's an open question as to whether or not people still want to do that after the novelty has worn off. You might be able to prompt anything into existence and get a good result, but taste and distinctiveness and interestingness is probably still scarce, as is the ability to command an audience and break through people's personalized content bubbles.
Yeah, I think you could still get some services or preference buttons or subscription tiers, right, that allow you to filter anything with an AI watermark, probably. And our own personal agents will get better at understanding what we consider to be intrusive versus valuable in that equation. So there's still a necessity for brands to earn trust and interest in that space, whether it's personalized or not.
As someone who I know enjoys shared experiences, Kate, what do you think happens to mass culture if if we do end up with infinitely personalized media?
Yeah, well, we wrote about this in the forecast as well, right? Shared moments become more valuable, not less. And that's exactly what we've seen with sports, in particular the recent World Cup, Winter Olympics. Even if it was shared experience of watching someone from whatever country experience a US food or retail store for the first time, we enjoyed watching that together. And, personalization, mass culture then aren't opposites. Right? There are opportunities to extend the shared event into personalized content, which is what we saw. The shared event was
Mm,
the World Cup. That
mm,
created the overarching sort of umbrella. And even if you have personalized experiences within that, they still gain value by being tied to that. Funnily enough, we were talking about cycles earlier. We've been in this transition within the ad industry from ad revenue tied to professionally produced content, shifting to ad revenue going to UGC and fragmented creators as being larger, now into an even more atomized future of machine generated content for an audience of one, potentially, right? From there, I actually think we go back to professional content makers
mm,
where we don't have to come up with anything. It feels shared and important. I think you're already starting to see some of this with things like YouTube increasing the viewing metric thresholds for creators to be able to participate in ad revenue sharing. So we're already starting to
mm,
seeing
mhm.
this come back around, which would be an interesting counterintuitive thing from the availability of AI to personalize.
Cool. Well, I hope that before we get to individual, we go through the cycle. Somehow we manage to figure out household customization. It's still a massive gap in the market.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so it's 2035. We're in the long middle. How we've already talked about maybe the things that don't happen, but like how did we get here?
Okay, so let's break it into two parts. Over the next 4 years, I think we would expect to see an AI productivity boom, followed by the emergence of significant limitations that come from maybe errors or safety requirements or consumer pushback on agent delegation. Then from 2030 to 2034, you're getting stronger but fragmented regulation. And finally, a stable pattern of hybrid behavior. Agents are handling some shopping, but there's still active search that exists. And by 2035, we have our AI transformation in the economy, but it's in the image of today's structural competition instead of dominant companies, governments, or users. It's clear that the mess and the increased complexity is not just part of the transition, it's the system itself, and we continue to manage it like we do today.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as echoes of people shifting fully to e-commerce during the pandemic and lockdowns, but then broadly going back to the rate of change that we had seen in terms of e-commerce penetration growth over the previous several years. So, incremental change is something that I think would not be surprising to see.
Okay. We've arrived at the advice part of the podcast.
Ooh.
So, all right, let's talk about a strategic bet, a risk to map, and a signal to watch for advertisers. And I'm going to ask you, Kate, what is the strategic bet that companies could make today to prepare for a long middle?
All right. So again, I think we're sort of already seeing the green shoots of this, right? But advertising more broadly becomes thought of less as a cost of sales and more in terms of a durable brand asset. So for that, companies that are investing in adaptability, brand preference among both agents and humans, the things that you have to do day in and day out to build that long-term asset, rather than optimizing exclusively for one sort of predicted interface or platform. I think that's the winning bet there.
That's right. I think maintaining a strong brand and then also thinking about the future in the context of not just machines, which everyone's excited about right now, and as they should be, but your human audience and how are they going to want to interact with you in an AI future.
Yeah, do you think
Okay,
there's a risk that some people over-rotate towards agentic because it's the hot thing?
right. Okay, how about a strategic risk to map?
All right. Well, in a world of continuing or heightened competition, I think there's a risk of continuing to optimize for attention capture, which is the metric that a lot of people have fallen into or been trained to think about over the past several years. And even if we haven't delegated all of our decisions to agents, they're still likely to be performing a significant amount of information filtering for us, which means that I think you can't be in this attention capture model. It has to be trust built, trust developed, cut through by adding value, not just noise. So that's the risk, I think.
That's smart. I think mine, which is less sophisticated, is because this future is all about keeping your options open,
Yeah.
making sure that 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 doesn't become an excuse. Flexibility doesn't become an excuse for entrenched complexity.
Mm.
Okay, what's a signal that you'd be on the watch out for that might lead you to believe that this is the future we're headed for?
I would love if we could get stats on this. More data is always better. We just don't always get what we want. But the signal I'm hoping to watch for is the delegation gap, right? So not just how many people are asking AI for recommendations, but then how many purchases are being completed 100% autonomously by
Mm,
agents, right? Because here we're watching for that penetration of agentic versus how much is being kept, the decision making is being kept by humans. So if AI advice usage explodes but autonomous purchasing plateaus, that's very much a long middle signal.
right. Mine is probably multi agent continued use of multiple agents, right? So if people continue to use brand AI, like a workplace AI. They use OpenAI and Anthropic and Google as opposed to just sort of collapsing into a single preferred provider. I think that's what I'll be looking for.
I just had this image in my brain of, do you know what a squishmallow is? Do you,
Yes, yeah,
they're
there's plenty of them in our house. Yeah,
exactly. And I
yeah.
imagine opening up an app or a web page, and all of the agents are like these squishmallow personifications where which one am I going to use today for this
Yeah.
task? Very much like the picture in any parent's house right now, just a mound of squishmallows.
That
Squishvilles,
one
right? You
on
have the
me.
little
Yeah.
ones, the efficient ones. You've got the big pillow-sized one. I think we could really run with something here. It's a
We
good
should have called
analogy.
this the Squishmallow future. Yeah.
People would have been very confused reading the podcast title for that one. All right, so this is it, man. We've been through all 4 of our potential scenarios: closed loop, agent commons, sovereign stack, and the long middle. Do you think is one more likely? Do you have a ranking for what we're most likely to see?
If you're going to prompt me into giving you an answer as if I'm your, personal AI agent, I'm going to be cynical and interesting, maybe. And rank the closed loop first. But I think the long middle is a close second, followed by the sovereign stack, and then, sadly, the agent commons in last place. How about you?
Boy, I could definitely see that future. I think there aren't a lot of good examples for where we've ended up at broad personal control with something like agent commons, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
I might put it slightly ahead of the sovereign stack just because the ability of government to manage things seems like it's vanishing faster than anything else.
Yeah.
I think it's a close run race maybe between the closed loop and the long middle, and that might just be a timeline thing. Maybe we get to what feels like the closed loop and then greater competition emerges, again, maybe with the evolution of world models or something, right? But between those two.
I think what has been so interesting to me about this process, just not like, any of these futures are the ones that we would necessarily design for ourselves or for the world. They're just 4 potential directions that we might end up in. But that as we've gone through each of them, they all feel plausible, but because they start obviously where we are today. But there's elements of today's reality in all of them, and probably whatever future we do end up in has ingredients from all of them in it.
Yeah, is that a 5th one that we haven't addressed yet? It's like the mashup of all of them. A super squashmallow. Like bits and pieces of all of them glued together.
My 5th future is the super intelligent future where AI becomes vastly more capable than us and has its own ideas about how civilization should work.
God.
Let's hope that works out well.
Surely that's the future where it's like, we don't need humans. That's your idea of the 5th one? I don't know.
Maybe we'll all be pets.
Okay, you've convinced me that I want the long middle without too much power sitting anywhere.
Cool. All right. Well, it's been very fun to be on your podcast, Kate. I appreciate how much work goes into making these things possible.
Yeah, you've lived it from the inside in more ways than one. But now as a co-host, which is very fun. We'll probably take a hiatus maybe for the end of summer and then be back with everyone as we get into the fall. We'll discuss more from rankings, reforecasting after we have all of the 3rd quarter results in from media owners around the world, and very much looking forward to coming back and speaking with you about all of that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening to the WPP Media Intelligence podcast. It's meant for informational entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial advice.